to that work, which is really very, very stellar. I'm going to read to you, but I promise it won't be boring. And this is out of the letter that was written for Tonda's nomination by Marilyn Summers, who is currently the director of the Penn Center for Global Women's Health. That's at University of Pennsylvania. Some of these paragraphs are they just capture it. So I'll be reading, but I promise it will not be boring. She starts out, there are certain risks when one centers a program of research on marginalized populations. Professor Hughes compounded these risks, this was very courageous, by studying women who drink and use other drugs, and sexual minority women. So right there, she's a risk taker, and she was taking a risk from the very beginning. And I don't know, there's a lot of young people in the room. When Tonda started her work, this was something you couldn't study. This just was not studied. So she was completely a risk taker. As she worked toward tenure and promotion, she demonstrated not only perseverance, but clarity of purpose and courage. And she became the clearest national voice in nursing and many other disciplines to promote the health of sexual minority women. She accomplished this feat not only with grace and compassion, but with extraordinary scientific rigor that garnered respect at many of the institutes and centers of the National Institutes of Health, including the NIAA, National Institute of Mental Health, and National Institute on Drug Abuse. And I can say that I know all these words are true. Here's some more. Her work untangling the influences of sexual identity, depressive distress, and alcohol use and misuse is unparalleled. Taken as a whole, Professor Hughes' body of work is among the most focused science on the topic of sexual minority health that has resulted from our discipline or any other. These are tremendous. Talk about impact. This is, and it's absolutely, every word is true. Here's my last piece. This is it, and then Tonda gets the stage. Of greatest importance. Sorry. You two go way back. I might have to ask Terry. I don't get this out. Of greatest importance. One more time. Is the overall scope and influence of her research. Researchers working in the field of sexual minority health and substance use simply must refer to her work to be credible. Let me read that again. Of greatest importance is the overall scope and influence of her research. Researchers working in the field of sexual minority health and substance use simply must refer to her work to be credible. I mean, that is the stellar scholar. Those of us who serve on federal grant review panels hear consistent references from panel members about her work involving sexual minorities. No one else has the depth and breadth of data, nor the ability to insightfully interpret these data on sexually minority people receiving health care around the world. Her work has forever changed the practice of addictions nursing and the implementation of population science, as investigators must consider sexual minority women in their work if it is to be representative. Strategies for health promotion of a significant proportion of the female population have forever changed because
Yeah, that wasn't fair of her, was it? Sorry, I didn't intend that.
Thanks, Terry. Thanks, Carol. Thanks to all of you for being here and for making this day possible. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for many of you in the audience. so grateful. And I think I better put on my glasses and look at my notes because otherwise I'll totally screw up. I'd also like to thank the members of the research committee for their work in reviewing the nominations, and to Terry for her vision in establishing this award, and for all she does to support research and researchers at the college. We wouldn't be where we are if it weren't for her, and I'm very, very grateful. Some of you may know that I've received a couple, or will receive a couple of other awards this year, but I want you to know that this one is truly, truly special. It's not unusual for people, for nurses in particular, to work hard and to sometimes take risks for the good that we think and hope that we can do for other people and other people's health. But it can sometimes be lonely. It can be solitary when you're not sure that your colleagues understand or appreciate your work. Having this recognition from my peers is gratifying in a way that no other award can match. So I want to thank all of you for your part in this. I'd like to especially acknowledge members of my research team, especially Kelly Martin and Robin Nisi, without whom I wouldn't have made it. I certainly wouldn't be here, particularly with the administrative roles that I've had over the past 5 years, and I'm very, very grateful to them for that. I'm also grateful to all of my colleagues in the Health System Science Department and others in other departments in the college, and to my research mentors, 2 of whom are here, and I'll mention them a little bit later, and to my very special friends, the people who are closest to me in my life, for being here. Some of them drove quite a distance. One of my friends actually was here in Chicago hovering around this morning but unable to land, so I know that she's here in spirit. Preparing for this presentation was an absolutely amazing opportunity to reflect on my 25 years as a nurse researcher, and especially on my work with stigmatized and marginalized population groups. What I'd like to do this afternoon is to take you on a little journey of how I got to where I am today, stopping along the way here and there to talk about some of the lows and the highs in my career, and also to mention some of the most important and I think, well, some of the most interesting and I think important findings. My focus on sexual minority health research began about 20 years or so ago in the early 1990s. At that time, I made a discovery, and that discovery actually changed the course of my research career. I'd been doing research related to women's health for several years, and what I'd learned is that almost all of the research until that time had been conducted with men, by men, and so most of what we knew about health was based on the experiences of men. It was actually that time that the Government Accounting Office criticized NIH for excluding women from most studies involving diseases, treatments, and drug effects, and for devoting only 13% of its research funds to women. Just a few years later, NIH began requiring that researchers include women in all the studies that involved human subjects, or to provide strong rationale for why that wasn't possible now, or wasn't feasible or appropriate. We know that that's been partially successful, not as much as we think it should have been, but important nevertheless. I'd like to show you how the pattern of what happened with women was also mirrored in research related to sexual minority women. It was around this time that I discovered that just as women had been left out of most of the research on health in general, sexual minority women were being left out of research on women's health. There was a review of the literature published in the American Journal of Public Health in 2002, and basically this covered 20 years of literature indexed in Medline, and what my colleague found was that over 20 years, only 1/10 of 1% of all articles in Medline talked about sexual minority people. The majority of those focused on gay and bisexual men, and that focused primarily on sexually transmitted diseases, things like HIV and AIDS. Only about 1/3 of 1% of that really tiny number of studies focused on sexual minority women. Now, before the 1980s, most of the research done with sexual minority people focused on alcohol. And because it was really hard to find research participants to participate in studies, researchers went to gay bars to recruit their samples. This is a really intelligent audience, and I want you to tell me what you think researchers found. They found lots of alcohol problems. In fact, the literature for a number of years around that time and afterward estimated that at least 1/3 of all lesbian women and gay men were alcoholic or had serious alcohol problems. So my work over the past 20 or so years has been trying to provide a more scientifically grounded understanding of sexual minority women's use of alcohol. I wouldn't be where I am today if it weren't for a whole lot of people, including those pictured here. I'd like to acknowledge my master's advisor, Gretchen Lagadna, and Alice Dan, one of my PhD advisors, both of whom are here today, as well as the others who are pictured here. In addition to my academic mentors, I also owe a huge debt of gratitude to my parents. I'm the daughter of a coal mining father and a Jill of all trades mother, neither of whom had a college education, but both of whom were the biggest proponents of my education and the education of my siblings. I, like many people from Eastern Kentucky, got married when I was young. But I wasn't nearly as young as my third cousin, Loretta Lynn, who got married when she was 13 or 15. It really depends on the report that you believe. But she was pretty young. I got my associate degree just before I got married. And my bachelor's degree just after I got divorced. Both from Eastern Kentucky University, so there's something about that place, I think. I did my master's degree at the University of Kentucky in community mental health, where I had two amazing mentors. Dr. Gretchen Lagadna was one of those. This program changed not only my view of myself, but my view of the world, and set me on a career path on substance use among women. After I joined the faculty at the University of Kentucky, I've actually been asked to join the faculty at every school that I've been a student at. So it either means I am, I won't give up or something. But after I joined the faculty at the University of Kentucky, Gretchen and Joe were approached by the Kentucky Board of Nursing to establish a program, to help them develop a program that would help nurses who had problems with drug and alcohol use. They called, we were students, the students who were master's students at the time, helped them develop this program, and we called it Nurses Assisting Nurses. It provided counseling and was also had a research component so that we could better understand the risk factors that influence nurses to be involved or to have trouble with alcohol and other drugs. It was really a pioneering program at the time, because even though programs like this had been around for physicians for many years, that there weren't programs for nurses, and so nurses were typically fired and left to their own devices with few resources to seek help. I chose UIC for my PhD because of its really strong women's health program. Those were exciting times, weren't they, Alice? Because the women's health movement had just begun, and nursing academics were at the forefront of that movement. In fact, three of my mentors here, Alice Dan, Beverly McElmurray, and Denny Webster, were leaders in the movement to shift the focus from women as reproductive machines to women as experts on their own health. I finished my PhD in October 1989, but for those of you who know Beverly McElmurray, know that this is true. I did a lot of other things during my PhD, including being the associate editor for a UIC publication called Nursing Scan and Women's Health, co-editing a book, the first book on addiction in the nursing profession, and co-editing a special issue on nursing clinics in North America. So these things undoubtedly delayed the completion of my degree, but they were extremely important in my career development, including my being invited to join the faculty here at UIC. So I have no regrets. I graduated with a large number of women's health students, some of whom are pictured here. To your, I have no idea, to one of Bev's sides is Sheila Toulouse, who went on to be a member of Parliament and the Minister of Health in Botswana. And to Bev's other side, the short woman, is Naima Al-Ghassir, who's now is a leader in the World Health Organization in the Middle East. And Naima will be honored next month, one of 3 of all the University of Illinois Alumni Achievement Awards. So we hope that you can be here for that. Early in my tenure at the University of Illinois, I developed a program, an application, and was awarded an individual postdoctoral research fellowship where I gained a great deal more expertise about substance use among women, and also had a lot of opportunities to travel to conferences and to meet the leading researchers in my field. It was that time that I met Sharon Wilsnack, who was doing a 20-year national longitudinal study of women's drinking in the general population. Sharon is an internationally renowned researcher, and I always say that teaming up with her was probably the smartest thing that I did in my career. I think it's very, very smart for all junior people to do that, but because my research focused on this stigmatized and marginalized population, having somebody with this credibility was extremely important, and I'm grateful to her. I continue to be grateful. We've been working together since, and we're about to submit another grant application. Now, even though I wasn't aware of it early in my career, my research has always been based on health equity and social justice. These are perspectives that are critical to work with stigmatized and marginalized populations. Even though we've come quite a ways recently, there still is a lot left to do in this regard. For example, there's 75 countries, at least, in the world where it's illegal to be homosexual, and where homosexual acts or people who are perceived or believed to be homosexual can be put to death, and about 10 of those. Even in the U.S., where we've made a lot of progress, there are still 29 states where it's legal to fire someone for being out as gay, lesbian, or bisexual in the workplace. And in 34 states, employers have the legal right to fire people who are transgender. And while sexual minority people make up about 4% of the U.S. population, 19% of all hate crimes target sexual minorities. And the hate crimes that target sexual minorities tend to be much more vicious and violent than those that target other minority groups. One of the most egregious forms of hate crimes perpetrated against sexual minority women is a form of sexual violence called corrective rape. Some call it curative rape. The people pictured here are victims of corrective rape. The woman on your left was a South African soccer star who was raped and brutally murdered, brutally raped and murdered. I guess it all ends up the same way, just a few years ago in South Africa. South Africa is probably where the most attention is focused on this egregious crime, but it happens in lots and lots of other countries and has been documented in the U.S. and Canada. And just in case you're tempted to conflate South Africa with other African countries like Uganda, South Africa was the first country in the world to change its constitution to include protections for sexual minority people. And it was the 5th country in the world to legalize same-sex marriage. So even though policies are in place, there's still a lot more left to be done. Our studies, my early work, also found very high rates of violence and victimization among sexual minority women. In my first study, which I worked on with Alice Dan, it was a needs assessment in Chicago funded by the Chicago Department of Public Health and the Lesbian Community Cancer Project. And we found rates of childhood abuse in that study that were twice as high as those of heterosexual women who we included in the study, a matched heterosexual comparison group. We later extended that study to include 3 other cities in the U.S., and in those studies, we also found very high rates of not only childhood, but also adolescent and adult victimization. Again, 2 to 3 times as high as that of matched heterosexual controls. In concert with those studies, and around the same time, I began developing my own research study, which we called the Chicago Health and Life Experiences of Women Study, or CHALU for short, which Kelly tells me means a pigsty. We called it that because it was named after the national study of health and life experiences of women, which was Sharon's national study. We adapted and extended that study and pilot tested and did a lot of early work with funding from the College of Nursing Institutional Research Support Program and the Campus Research Board, and applied for and we were successful in the first study, which was a research career mentored research career award, a K award from the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and the Office of Women's Health Research. Our goal there was, because luckily we included many of the things to address methodological limitations in the landmark Institute of Medicine report on IOM, the IOM Institute of Medicine report on lesbian health. That report was released in 1999, the same year that the grant was funded, and we had included diverse samples, so we were addressing the over-reliance on small and homogeneous samples. We included a heterosexual comparison group in the early pilot work, and also our study, which we didn't know at the time, but we planned for it to be a longitudinal study, and there were none at that time. We were very successful in recruiting this original sample. We were successful in recruiting about 450 women. More than half of them were women of color, and they met a lot of the other criteria that we were looking to represent. One of the interesting findings about that research, and for those of you who know the alcohol research, you probably know that in general, white women are more likely to drink, and to drink heavily, than are black women and Latina women. But we found in this sample of sexual minority women that black women were about 4 times as likely to report heavy drinking, and you can see substantially more likely than Latina women also to report heavy drinking. And by combining the CHALU and the in-CHALU samples, we showed that sexual minority women's drinking was had a slower and lower decline with age than was true for heterosexual women. I'm proud to say that the CHALU study, pigsty or not, is now in its 15th year. We've been fortunate to receive 2 more large R01 grants from NIH, both from NIAAA, which allows us to expand and extend the study, making it actually the largest, longest-running study of sexual minority women's health on any topic in not only the U.S. but other parts of the world. I've also been part of a number of other research groups, both in Australia and in the U.S. These are examples of some of the large national data sets that we've worked on, and these are examples of some of the non-probability samples that we've worked on, that I've worked on, both of which, both probability and non-probability, are really important in advancing science. So rather than try to summarize work from all of these studies, what I thought I would do is just highlight a few of what I think are the most interesting and intriguing findings. And that's what I'm going to do. So, as I've alluded to already, one of the most important findings of our work is the continuing finding of sexual minority women's rates of lifetime drinking that are lifetime victimization, at least drinking, are 2 to 3 times higher than those of heterosexual women. We've also found, and I don't know that anybody else has reported this, that childhood abuse appears to be much more severe among sexual minority women than among heterosexual women. By combining the national study and the Toulouse study, we've been able to look at sexual minority groups from across a broad range. And we found that by doing that, bisexual women really stand out as being at highest risk and showing the most negative health outcomes. In contrast, certainly in contrast to what we thought we knew in past years, women who identify as lesbian and who only report female partners look very similar to heterosexual women in terms of their health risk and outcomes. This is a recent finding from Bethany Everett, who's here in the audience, by asking women to rate themselves on a femininity, masculinity scale. We found that women, sexual minority women who have higher femininity scores report lower levels of discrimination, but higher levels of internalized stigma and depression. Women, on the other hand, who are more masculine, report lower levels of internalized stigma and depression, but higher levels of external discrimination, victimization, and hazardous drinking. Also, because we've been able to combine and look within the sexual minority population, we found that women who identify as mostly heterosexual differ in really interesting and important ways from women who identify as exclusively heterosexual. And we're one of a handful, if that, research groups who have actually included questions that allow us to look at this group. We just did some analyses, and if you look at the mostly heterosexual column, you'll see that women who pick that intermediate response option are 2 to 4 times as likely as women who identify as exclusively heterosexual to report this whole range of alcohol and drug use outcomes. Lots of people ask about the different dimensions of sexual orientation, but most studies, especially most national studies, only ask one question. Usually it's identity, the cognitive part of our orientation, or behavior, because they're interested in sexually transmitted diseases. And some, especially adolescent research teams, ask about attraction, but rarely do studies ask about all 3. And by doing that, we've found some other really interesting and important things. We found that women whose sexual identity matches their sexual behavior and attraction, in other words, a woman who identifies as lesbian, is attracted to women, has sex with women, they have lower risk than, say, heterosexual women who have sex with women, or lesbians who have sex with men. We've also found that women whose sexual identity remains stable have lower risk profiles than those whose identity changes over time, and this is really true regardless of which direction it's going in, whether it's in the direction of more same-sex orientation or less same-sex orientation. So we've actually come quite a long way since most of what we knew about sexual minorities, not just about alcohol, but about anything that we knew, is from samples that were recruited in gay bars. But we still do have a long way to go to understand the underlying mechanisms of health disparities. And that's part of what I'm so excited about. In our last wave of data collection, we happened to be in the field. We had about half of our sample interviewed when Illinois passed the civil union bill. So we have data from before and after. And interestingly, women who were interviewed after the bill passed show better outcomes, including lower levels of perceived stigma and discrimination, lower levels of depressive symptoms and hazardous drinking. And even more interesting is that these benefits are most apparent for Black and Latina women and women with lower levels of education, making us think that it could be something to do with having multiple marginalized statuses that allow these women to benefit even more than white high SES women. Now this is exciting, but even more exciting is the fact that I've talked to you all about all this data that we've been collecting since 1999. And many of you know that in June this year, Illinois became the 16th state to pass the same-sex marriage bill. So what we're going to be able to do now is compare women over all those years with what happens afterward. We're going to ask some open-ended questions. I'm saying we're going to do this, and we are going to do it. I don't have the funding yet, but I know it's coming. I know it's coming. But I mean, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. This is a major historic change, unlike any we've seen for many years, and we have an opportunity that no one else has to capitalize on that opportunity. So stay tuned. I'll have many more interesting findings in a few years, and I think I'll have some stories like this one of these two women who, after being together for 72 years, got married 3 weeks ago in Iowa. So it's really exciting. I need my notes for some of this last part. So in addition to new discoveries that are changing public attitudes, policies, clinical practice, one of the most rewarding aspects of my work is to have the opportunity to give voice to population groups who have been largely invisible. And in the CHLU study, we get a lot of positive comments about our work and a lot of notes. And I'd like to just share with you one that I think sort of represents the general theme of many of the notes that we get. The participant wrote, "Thank you for doing this study. I didn't think that anyone cared about lesbians' lives or their experiences. Spending time with the CHLU interviewer and reflecting on my life helped me realize that I'm doing pretty well and that I've accomplished a lot. Just because I'm not heterosexual doesn't mean that I'm less than anyone else or that I deserve less than anyone else." A few months ago, a couple sent us a donation for $18. They've been doing this for several years. They've been part of the CHLU study since the beginning. And they send us a donation in the amount that represents the number of years that they've been together. And they thank us each time for the work that we're doing to improve the lives of sexual minority women. Things like this help me know that I'm making a difference and help me get over some of those bumps in the road that I referred to earlier. One of those early bumps was when senior colleagues suggested that maybe I shouldn't focus on sexual minority women's drinking for my research program. Funding might be a problem, and I should probably really wait until after I had tenure. And a little bit later, in 2003, when I found myself on an NIH hit list, a list of NIH studies that were being questioned. This was spearheaded by a conservative religious group. Were being questioned about what they could possibly do to benefit the public health of the American people. I was in really good company. There were researchers from Stanford, Johns Hopkins, even Harvard. But the effect was chilling. I didn't answer the phone for at least 2 months because I didn't want to hear from NIH if they were going to take away my funding. And I also didn't want to answer one more reporter who was going to ask me if I really believed that this was a good use of taxpayers' money. But despite those things, I feel extremely fortunate to be living in these historic times and to have the opportunity to contribute to the advancement of knowledge about sexual minority women's health. And I'd like to end. I also wanted to recognize my good friend and great supporter, Tracy Baim, who is the editor of the Windy City Times in Chicago, because I've gotten the most positive press from many city times, beginning with my first study and up until just very recently. I've also gotten some not so positive press from mostly conservative newspapers and news blogs. I mean, these are only a few of the, I mean, Google me. You'll see. There's lots of stuff out there that have really described our study in interesting ways. So I'd like to end with an excerpt from an address to the United Nations from one of the people that I consider so inspiring. This was in 2011, and Hillary Clinton said, "I want to talk about the work that we have left to do to protect one group of people whose human rights are denied in too many parts of the world today. In many ways, they are an invisible minority. They are arrested, beaten, terrorized, even executed. Many are treated with contempt and violence by their fellow citizens, while authorities empowered to protect them look the other way or too often even join in the abuse. They are denied opportunities to work and learn, driven from their homes and countries, and forced to suppress or deny who they are to protect themselves from harm. I'm talking about gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people, human beings born free and given bestowed equality and dignity, who have the right to claim that which is now one of the remaining human rights challenges of our time." And she ends by saying, "As it has happened so many times before, opinion will converge once again with the truth, the immutable truth, that all persons are created free and equal in dignity and rights." I want to add just a few more acknowledgments to all the people who participated both in the CHLU study and on other studies that I've worked on, to NIAAA, who has funded my research for 15 years, to hundreds and hundreds of women who participated in the study. And I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge our very own media guru, Mark Vershawn, his trusty assistant, Alicia McConnell, who helped me with the graphic editing of this presentation. I'd like to end just by saying something that I think that encapsulates my feelings. I am so humble, I'm practically speechless. But I wanted to end with a quote from Cher. Cher won the Oscar in 1987 for the movie Moonstruck. And what she said was, "I know this doesn't mean that I am somebody, but I hope it means I'm on the way to becoming somebody." Thank you all for helping me become somebody.
Just think that if those groups had prevailed and had that influence, and I know of several of my colleagues as well who were adversely affected by the scrutiny of NIH's decision-making bodies, our peers, how we would not have had the findings that Tonda has just recently shared with us, but I mean her most recent findings about those negative health outcomes and how important they are today for such a group of individuals who already are vulnerable. So, Tonda, that was incredibly inspiring. Extremely well done. I think we all got choked up. Just a little thank you. Flowers from your fans.
Beautiful.
And on behalf of the college, this is for what we all want in the future, next year. You heard the commercial. I want to present you with this award and monetary gift.
Thank you so much.
Thanks to all of you.
couldn't do this if it weren't for the stellar researchers that we have in this college and all the other people who make what we do possible. Thank you very much.